I'm Barbara Lande. I'm a longtime member of the Friends of Calligraphy. I've worn many hats, and in the most recent years, you might have seen my name on several of the flyers that have been distributed for workshops. I'd like to welcome you to a conversation of esteemed journal editors today. With us, we have Judy Detrick, Jane Brenner, John Prestianni, Melissa Titone, Rohrs, Christopher Calderhead, and Marcia Friedman. This conversation is part of a series of interviews of our founding and early members and other significant groups that have made the Friends the wonderful organization it is today. We have launched this conversation, and it will be posted with a link on our website where you will also find the full series of interviews that have been conducted to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Friends of Calligraphy. Our website is friendsofcalligraphy.org, and we invite you to peruse it at your leisure. Thanks so much. Let me get started with this interview now. So I'll just get started. I don't know the order in which you were all director. So as we go around, maybe we can have your dates. Just so that's a hard
Wait
question,
a
right,
minute.
Christopher? Um,
You have to look it up.
I love that. And I'm gonna try to jot them down as we go. So I'm
I,
just curious because I don't know the answers to that question. And
I did send it to you a little while ago.
and
Check.
I don't wait, did I mean I don't know the answer to this either. So were any of you working in a black and white? Was it anybody who did not have yeah. So that gives me a little hint of your timing. Um and so or what order you were in. And so why don't we start with Marcia and in the order in my screen, which is not going to be the same as
Oh,
yours.
actually, John was the
John was
first.
the first. Okay, so John Prestiani,
Hi.
please introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm John Prestiani. I was editor approximately 1982 to 1986, roughly. Um, to my everlasting embarrassment, I was a full year behind at the end, so don't quote me on those dates, particularly with the passage of time. Um, I was a commercial calligrapher for 22 years and eventually realized that legal advocacy was really what I wanted to pursue um, as a job. And so I changed careers and became an attorney. I went to law school and all of that, and have been an attorney for 30 years now. So far longer than I was ever a calligrapher and practicing designer. In addition to commercial calligraphy, um, I worked in publication design, pre-digital mostly. Mostly, I did transition to digital in the late 80s, reluctantly, because I don't actually like doing art related things on a computer. As exciting as digital tools are, it's not really my motivation. I like things that are done by hand, and I consider calligraphy a craft as well as an art. And as a craft, I particularly um, am interested in handwork, things done by hand. It's a little disturbing to me. I'm becoming aware that there are some calligraphers who are moving to digital um, in a very early stage in their design work. And I cannot relate to that. So perhaps that's just my age as well as my predilection. Um, what would you like me to talk about, Barbara? You want me to talk about your questions, or that you gave us some questions? No, you don't
I,
care?
okay, so I think we'll just go around and have everybody talk, and then we'll come back
Okay.
to a question.
Okay. All right, I'm done.
So is Christopher, are you the next?
No, I think I'm next.
Oh, you're next. Okay.
Yeah. Oh.
The-
I'm Marcia Friedman, and I was editor twice. I was editor for 1 year from fall of '88 to summer of '89. And then I picked it up again in fall of 2010 to 2015, both times just before Carl. Um, and I came between John and my editorship was Alan, so I was only slightly intimidated by taking this on. But I was a professional graphic designer. I've been a designer for 40 something years and a calligrapher for almost as long. And it was just the perfect marriage of my interests to do this. And it was fun because I didn't have an art director for the first time. I got to do what I wanted, but then I gave it up for Carl.
And
Should
so
I go
Carl,
now?
would you like to pick it up from there?
Yeah,
Sure.
so
Sure. I followed Marcia in 1989 and I did it for 3 years. Um, and I've always been happy that I brought back the name Alphabet that, Alan had gotten rid of. But I was so influenced by John's issues that that was an influence then. It's an influence now. And I did it for 3 years and I enjoyed it, but I wasn't, it didn't drive me like it does now. And so I went back to, I was sign painting and teaching and doing calligraphy workshops all during that time. And I went back to doing that until 2015 when Marcia wanted to stop. And Susie was the one who really came to me and said, it pays $10,000 now. So I was like, well, that's interesting. But when I took over this last time, it just changed my life. I just fell deeply in love with every aspect of it, the research, the writing, and especially the designing and the conceptual stuff, deciding, coming up with stories and finding stuff. So I really, really love it now a lot. So I'm still editor since 2015, and I have no plans to stop. So I'm going to have to be, a coup is going to have to happen to get me out of here.
I,
Unmute.
I
What
think
was it? What did Alan call it?
He went back to the newsletter
Uh,
pretty much. And it seems to me that he had so many themed issues that he may not have even put newsletter on the cover, that he would put the theme as the like masthead for each issue, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner and those kinds of things. But I'd have to look. But it seems to me, but he really wanted it to go back to being reflective of the membership and our activities and our members being the people that were putting content in the magazine was what he was really after. And um, he thought John making it into more of a magazine that reflected the world of calligraphy um, was nice, but he wanted it to be FOC, and I love the idea of it being both. So I really wanted to go back that direction.
and
right. And who?
I called it the journal because I figured if Alan didn't have alphabet, we just called it the journal, but it was a combination of the journal and the bulletin. So it had both the articles about individual people and teachers and things that were happening, as well as the timely stuff like classes and news and announcement. So I had sort of a hybrid, and then Carl took it the next step.
And well, I don't remember ever having the bulletin being part of my responsibility when I took it over in 2000. Well, it wasn't in 2000, I mean 1989 either. I don't remember what was happening with that, but uh, John had separated it out, bulletin and newsletter when he turned it into Alphabet. So I don't. So it slipped back to being the same.
It went back to the same thing because whoever was doing the bulletin was a year or two behind. So
Oh,
it didn't really make sense to have news 2 years behind. So I folded the news into the alphabet and then you separate. Then we found somebody to take over bulletin and we had two separate publications ever since that time. Anyway, I think Jane came after Carl.
All right, let me introduce Jane. Would you like to take it from here?
I had been, I'm Jane Brenner. I came from a painting background. I had also begun to be aware of the computer. I had been designing the Mills College Quarterly for 15 years, and they decided they wanted to go with a computer. And I decided I did not want to go that way. So I became more involved with calligraphy. And when the editorship came along, I decided I would run for it. And I edited and designed it for 4 years, 1994 to 1998. And it was a joy and a pleasure. I loved all of it, every bit of it, working with the writers, working with the artists, putting it all together with a wonderful team, even though it was still all black and white.
And then Melissa was next.
Hey, Melissa. So when you took it over, Melissa, did we get color yet?
This was my first issue. Emiko Kenibuchi is on the cover. I don't know if you can see it. I'll unblur my background. That was the cover of my first issue. So yes, we went to color. And I think all the subsequent ones were still in black and white. So we splurged on our first issue. That was in fall 1998. And mine was a collaboration with Brooke Holvey. The two of us were working together on our issues. I only have 5 issues here. And I was looking at I was trying to figure out when I did this, 1998, 1999. And then I think I have one in 2000, which says that I'm going to be the editor by myself without Brooke for that year, but I didn't find any more. So I think I gave up doing it myself. I can't remember. Yeah, so I did 5 issues.
And then it was Christopher.
All right, Christopher, we're back to you.
Yeah, so I think I'm 2004 to 2008. I did it for 4 years. And actually Marcia was the one who sort of pushed me into doing it. I mean, I didn't have to get forced.
Yeah.
But I had the idea that it would be a good
I
thing.
did.
Wasn't Paul Shaw editor for
I think Paul did one year, like 2 issues, and there
right,
were 2 combined issues, but
right. So maybe that's the lag between Melissa and me.
I think so.
Yeah.
This handy dandy 50 years of stewardship tells us everything.
All right, fantastic. Okay. So so under me it was all black and white. And actually I'm looking at the production values of my issues and thinking, oh God, they're a little gray. I've gotten better at this since then. So I think this is the first real periodical that I ever picked up, did on a continuing basis. And I learned a lot by first of all picking up an existing publication and figuring out, all right, how do you take something that already has a life and a history and then shift it in whatever direction you want to take it in. But then also have that wonderful regularity that no issue is like a deal breaker or you have to be the most spectacular this issue. You have issue after issue after issue. And that kind of continuity is really nice, because it means the whole thing is an ongoing process. And that's so you chat with people and they don't come up with the article for this issue, but they will have it 2 issues down the road. And that allows you to develop things and sometimes allow people to take their time when they need to. So yeah. Is that enough? Want to hear more? That's
Like
the
to hear from Judy. We
uh,
haven't heard anything from Judy.
You're muted. Oh,
Sorry, Christopher.
you got it.
Sure. Okay, so I was fall 2007 to summer 2010. So, Christopher, you couldn't have been doing it in 2008 unless we did something together, but I don't think so.
no, I don't
Anyhow,
think I did. Yeah, okay. I trust you.
yeah. So, I came to this position because I teach graphic design or taught graphic design at the time and practiced graphic design, letterpress, calligraphy, and Susie Taylor told me to do this. I hadn't even considered doing it. And so I said, Susie, I would just be the primary example of the Peter principle at work, one who rises to her highest level of incompetence. And she said, nonsense, you're going to do this and you'll be fine. Okay. So that's what I did. The inside was black and white, or like Christopher said, gray and white. I didn't have very good control over the printing process because I lived 3.5 hours away from the Bay Area and they wanted it printed there. So I could not oversee what was happening all the time or hardly any of the time. And the design suffered from that, I think. But those kinds of mistakes or flaws, let's say, don't live on. They don't last forever. So I thought it was amazing that I could create this where I live digitally, and I embraced the digital age. I just thought it was terrific. I knew what I wanted it to do. And I also thought it'd be really fun to be the designer of ongoing publication.
Yeah.
And what aspect of that continuity was attractive to you?
Just because I hadn't done it before and I wanted to continue on. I wanted to see at least 3 years of the continuing appearance of the publication so that when people saw it, they would know exactly what they're looking at. When you change editors, you change the whole design aspect. And sometimes it's not always easy to tell, is this the same publication or, what is the continuity? So I decided that the continuity was going to be important to me. And it was. And I did have the freedom to use 2 colors on the cover.
Yeah.
And that was nice.
Black being one of them?
Yes. Black being one. Right.
We had 2 color covers all through the 3 years I did it from the late 80s to for the covers, and I could use any 2 colors. So we had the budget for that, but it was completely black and white guts, except for when we had the conference, we had extra money and we put in 8 pages of color. But in those days, it was photo separations, hundreds of dollars for each picture to start with, as well as the color printing. So it was black and white, except for that one issue that we had a few pages of color.
Yep. I did an issue that covered calligraphia. I forget what year it was. And I was able to do an 8-page insert in 4 color. And then I went back to black and white. Oh, no, that time it was black plus a second color. So I could do some duotones and I could use second color a little bit. And it wasn't until about 2014 that they said we could have 1 issue a year in full color. I was so excited, And then I think when Carl came along in 2015, they said, oh, let's have it in color all the time.
No, that was only caused because I went in to community printers. I was lucky enough to be allowed to have a local printer do it. I can walk to the printers. And I went in and I said, 2 color cover, black and white guts. And they go, well, let's show you digital printing. And they came in and showed me that the digital printing looked better than just a color zero. Xerox and said, "Here's the budget." I was like, "Okay." And so it was just that digital printing was affordable finally. It's probably cheaper these days to go full color digital than black and white on a press. So that's why we've been color all this time, was that my printer said it only costs this much. I was like, hallelujah.
Yeah. And it's really made a difference. The quality is,
Oh,
it's just amazing.
it's so fun to design like that. And then when we have, and I do like the aesthetic of black and white issues. So we've had a couple of those, and that limitation is a really, creative, enhancing thing to go back to black and white. And then it's fun to just drop in, a spot of red someplace, and see if people notice. So the digital age has made a big difference for what we can do with the journal. So
I'll add just one thing that is not specifically bulletin related, but I remember trying to design in color for litho, not before digital, on a black and white monitor. And having to keep in your head that, this 20% gray is green and this 30% gray is a red, and trying to map that. And then you get to go to press and see what the heck it actually looks like.
Well, I'm a big psychedelic poster nut, and a lot of those were completely done in black and white, where they were making the four color plates and guessing with zipatone rub down halftones and stuff, and guessing it, mixing, yellow and cyan, hoping that they're going to get the green they want and stuff. So
They could do that because they were on drugs.
I think Christopher, didn't you do one issue where we did one page in color by hand?
I did, yes. Wait, let me.
You're muted again, Christopher.
I know. There we go.
All right, sorry.
Yes, I did one where there were, let's see, I pulled it out, where we did stencils.
That's what it was.
John Burns designed the stencil.
Huh.
And so I had stencil parties where people, so you can see those are the stencils that were designed. And then each copy had its own unique stencil because you could rearrange these words in any way you wanted. So we had a limited color palette, and we had an afternoon where people sat and did a new stencil in every single issue, every single copy.
Was that in the Bay Area or back east?
So I'm trying to remember. I know I did one back east here in New York. And I seem to remember there was something that I did where there was a group.
Yeah, but I don't remember if it was that issue or not.
I don't think it was. Yeah. So I may have tried it twice. But the first time was the best. And what's great is everybody got a unique thing because whoever's stenciling might do art, or is, or art is it, or art it is, or right. So, and they all came out different. And
What's
I
the
really,
cover of that one?
what?
What is the cover of that? Can you hold that up? Okay, I'll go
Oh,
look.
yeah. It was my second one. It's spring 2004. And what I liked about that especially was it was an attempt to do something by hand in a printed thing. So you actually have a piece of handwork there. I also actually did my third issue. I was so irritated with the printer because the printer's rep was just a shyster. And so he would never give me an honest answer about what was going on. And so finally, third issue, I'm like, we don't need you. We're good. And so I did one as a zine with rubber stamps, and I photocopied the whole thing. I inserted color photocopies inside, and I assembled the whole thing by myself, stamped all of the copies. I think we had 1,000 that we ran. I don't know, something like that. Took me forever. Cost me exactly the same amount in the end of the day as it did to print with a professional printer. But I loved the the weirdness of actually just doing the whole thing on a photocopier. Um, and I remember Georgiana Greenwood, because I laid it out with a very sort of zine type feel and a lot of rubber stamps inside. And Georgiana Greenwood said, "You do know how to do graphic design, don't you?" So, but I did that on purpose.
I did one time. I had a bit of Chinese calligraphy, and I think it was my very first issue. And I just had a rubber stamp made of his chop, and I rubber stamped that. But that's not anywhere near as ambitious as that issue of yours, Christopher.
That was crazy. And I went right back to the printer after that. Like, I'll put up with your
Same
nonsense.
guy?
Yeah. Yeah, same guy.
So I'm intrigued by something Judy said about wanting continuity from beginning to end to, I guess, have a consistent signature to her designs. And I'm wondering if any of you felt the same way, or maybe completely the opposite. Maybe you wanted to change up every issue, or you were looking for a specific kind of what I would call inside growth, where you had certain goals and it took a couple of issues to arrive at something. So I invite anybody who wants to speak on that subject.
Sure, let me start. So, the first year I retained the name newsletter. That was about it, was the name. Don Moy and Georgiana had built an incredible foundation with what they did as the publications editor for Friends of Calligraphy. Where I felt I could add value was moving away from a set of loose sheets stapled up in the corner. And the reason why I felt strongly about that was because their intention was to make it a substantive publication. Okay, it was not fooling around. It was serious coverage of events. It was articles, real articles, that people wrote carefully and edited carefully. Particularly Don Moy was very interested in that approach. And so I felt like the entire publication could be elevated by turning it into a conventional booklet form, with the double sheets that were more or less bound, and it was like a permanent book. It wasn't sheets stapled up in the corner that could fall apart. And once having made that decision, in the second year, I decided to bring it to another level with an actual graphic format, a typographic format, in a conventional way. Looking at it today, it's quite conventional. So that was very deliberate, and bringing that format into play with the publication was actually very liberating, because within that format, there were possibilities for great variation depending on what was being treated. So yeah, that absolutely has to do with consistency from issue to issue. Now, after my tenure, of course, people did things differently, particularly Alan Blackman, who had no connection to that kind of thinking. He really didn't. Love him as I did always, and treasured him as I always did. He was a force of nature unto himself. So, that was quite intentional all the way through.
Do we have anybody else who wants to pick it up from here? Go ahead, Melissa.
Barbara, weren't you editor also?
Me, I was bulletin editor, not alphabet editor.
When I was working with Brooke, she was determined to change everything. And so the main format change that we made was going from the 8.5 by 11 size to this 10 by 10 publication, which I think did present some issues with mailing, and but it required a complete reformat of everything inside as well. It was interesting though. It's the only issues that I've seen that are that size. It was fun to play with.
Speaking of size, I did go away from 8 1/4 by 11 to 8 1/4 by 11 3/4, which corresponds roughly to what's called A4 format. So it's actually a slightly taller shape, which I felt was aesthetically more in keeping with a publication on calligraphy and related book arts. So that the shape of the object was something that could be done.
Did that mean that you had a budget in a different envelope?
I'll look for that in the San Francisco Public Library, where all of this is kept.
Yeah.
So I did 8 inches by 11 because I didn't want that sort of wide page. So mine are all just a hair off of 8 1/2 by 11.
I think Carl, Carl's muted.
I actually asked the printer what was the most economical way to do things. So I was just saying, give me a size, I'll stick to that, and then I can design around that. If it's going to save us some money, we can have extra pages or whatever. So that was the size. So we're a little below 8 1/2 by, so it's 8 1/4 by 10 3/4 is my shape now. But I always thought the taller proportion was really handsome.
I always liked designing in an A4 format, but it was strongly suggested to me that I stick with 8 1/2 by 11, particularly back when I took over from Alan, because Alan's issues were so different, but they were 8 1/2 by 11, and the powers that be said, it would be more efficient printing. So I just did that because I was used to designing that way. But I do agree with John. I think the A4 format is more elegant and just has better proportions.
And I'm sorry that you mentioned the powers that be, because in the bylaws of the Friends of Calligraphy from day one, the position of editor is independent and not subject to oversight by the FOC Council or anyone else.
I wish I had known that then. I read the bylaws.
It's still true today, right,
Well,
Carl?
we're so glad you went to law school, John.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I learned that well before law school.
I get nobody has come and said, do this, do that. We didn't like this. I've never gotten any of that. The freedom has been total. It's been fantastic. I'd be surprised if most of you didn't feel that way when you were doing it.
The nicest thing is not having an art director, is being free to do what you want to do. I was always conscious of all the people that came before me, the first time and the second time, trying to measure up and make sure it keeps to the standards, but being able to design on your own and choose the content was always very freedom.
With that said, I think maybe we'd take a minute just to say that even though you are editor and you have your own freedom, that there are other people who contribute to these issues, including the proofreaders who get very little.
I hope you don't feel that I don't love and cherish my proofreaders.
I don't know who your
they've
proofreader is. I'm just saying, let's talk about that there are auxiliary people that if somebody decides they want to take this on, that having good proofreaders or editors or whatever is part of the challenge of being in charge of these editions.
It is. If I can talk about this, Meredith has been there since the beginning. And when I started, I had a real lackadaisical attitude towards proofreading. And I got a big wake-up call right away. And since then, she is unbelievable. And the people that have assisted me. There have only been a few. They've just been wonderful. And so many, I'll send the thing out and I'll get the proofing back. And I'm like, you check that? You check that? I can't even, they fact check everything. And so Meredith and Barbara DiMaria and Sandy Collins and now Joan Passarelli, phenomenal. I can't thank them enough. I try to every single issue. So Meredith.
I was very lucky. I had Debbie Turrieta, who lives right in town with me, and she would come over, and she was a brilliant proofreader both times that I did this. I depended on her. She could catch everything, and she would look things up. And the only thing was that she said when she proofread the issue, she knew what it was. So when she got it in the mail, it wasn't as exciting as when she wasn't proofreading. And Barbara was an incredible help to me editorial wise. The toughest part for me was writing the editor's column. And I would get the ideas and I'd put down words, and then Barbara would make me sound a lot better than I actually wrote it. And she was, incredibly valuable for that. And just all the people that would come to me with ideas for articles, or would write, or would say yes when I twisted their arm and asked for articles. Christine Colasordo, who sadly passed away a few years ago, she was amazing. I counted this out yesterday. I did 22 issues, and she contributed to 9 of them with articles that she wrote. She did the photography, and she always came to me. She said, I have an idea here, or let me do that. And she was amazing. She was a wonderful writer. And I always said, if I could have Christine to write every article for every issue, I would have done this in perpetuity, just because she was great to work with.
So, speaking of having outside help, when you were mentioning earlier that sometimes it took a couple of issues if you had a plan and that article didn't come and you had to think about filling in, how hard was that to punt and come up with a new layout or have some other article? Did you always have a handful of things to choose from?
Who are you asking?
Anybody who wants to answer. Does anybody want to speak to that? Like trying to coordinate your,
Judy does.
yeah.
Judy was.
I can't remember ever being short of articles. And I think there were like 7 or 8 sometimes, 7 or 8 articles in the issues. One of the things that I established was a gallery, and I invited the membership to send in things so that they could be put into the alphabet, and we would show them of their work. So I always had the gallery.
My fallback was book reviews. So if the article that I was expecting didn't come in, I would write a book review, sometimes a couple book reviews, or I would adjust layouts like Jane said. That was not terrifying to me. It was just annoying. But, I managed to pull it off. And I think it was because I knew I had to do it. I came up with something. So it's one of those bootstraps kinds of things.
So yeah, that happened to me, but it happened in ways. And first, let me thank Meredith for pointing out that the bylaws have changed since my time. So I just checked them, my copy, and yes, Meredith, you are correct. The editor must coordinate with the council today. But back in the early 80s, that was not true. But yeah, so as far as the flow, the first thing I want to say is, in my view, looking back on this now, there are several distinct skill sets in publication production that are involved with this particular beast. editorial director, editorial manager, copy editor, art director, graphic designer, production artist, print coordinator, and certainly author. I had some articles that I felt did not merit publication. They were too frivolous, or they were overly concerned with the author's interpretation. Specifically, I'm remembering one where a very well-known calligrapher was being interviewed by an author who somehow managed to not at all convey what this calligrapher really did, and what they were worth. And I just felt like, no, I can't. I sort of had semi-committed to publishing it before it was done, but when it was delivered, it was I had to reject it, and it. And like somebody wanted to start a gossip column, seriously, a gossip column. And I felt like that was dangerous territory to go to, so I couldn't do that. So yeah, book reviews, those were useful, Judy. Did some of those.
Well, I have to say that I am never at a loss for something to put in there. I'm always taking something that I'm planning on putting in an issue and having to put it off because I keep wanting. I feel like if I'm going to do these stories, I want to make them as rich as possible. So that's why I've kind of fallen back down to just 3 articles in an issue, maybe 4. But there's just never any. I've got a file full of possible story ideas that just goes on forever. It's just amazing how rich the world is of calligraphy, and so it's so much fun that way.
I had Hobie McQuarrie approached me when I first started the second term, and he had all these ideas for cartoons about the alphabet, about the letters and numbers and different things. So Hobie was a godsend because it was fun to showcase his work. It was always clever. It had his particular style, and it would always help me fill up the page. I knew I could, stretch things out, and Hobie would come to the rescue if I needed filler stuff.
Hobie's the greatest.
Yeah.
We could take a few minutes now. I understand that there are a couple of presentations that you have, both John and Carl. If you want to, I think it's set up to share your screen with us. So,
Carl, should I go first, or do you want to
Definitely.
go?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
no, it's your idea. Go ahead, please.
Okay, let's see how this works. Okay, let's try this. Share. Can everyone see that?
Mhm.
Okay. So this is just a title slide. What this is about are covers and also some interior artwork that I commissioned from various calligraphers or artists. And I felt like I wanted to highlight these because this was the best part for me in some ways, certainly in memory of my tenure as editor, was working with these folks and who so generously contributed original things to Alphabet that were not reprints of work that had appeared elsewhere. And they were, one thing I do want to say is the reproduction of calligraphy is actually, in my view, a big problem, because the special nature of a lot of the best calligraphy lies in the original object that is created by the scribe. When you make a reproduction of it, you get something else. And of course, you can design calligraphy to be printed. That's a little bit different, but it's a challenge in reproducing original calligraphy that is not designed for reproduction. And often it's very frustrating. Even I think today with the beautiful color digital printing that more and more we're seeing. So these covers were done for the journal. Okay, let's see. Oh dear. How do I get this to go? Okay, sorry. This is what I was afraid of. It worked when I tried it with Carl. And okay, here it is. Okay, so this is the first one. This was by David Meckelberg. This was a very early issue when I was still doing the news. And he was extremely generous. He not only did this calligraphy for the cover, but he also did some artwork for the interior. Okay, this was a piece of writing that he came up with that I reproduced as a full page in a vertical format. I think it makes a little more sense visually to look at it like this. And you can see these are all quotations by Edward Johnston. This piece he did to kind of highlight the traditions at the Immaculate Heart Art Department and under Carita Kent, who I think probably most people are familiar with Sister Carita. She was a nun before she left the order. I did go to Immaculate Heart. That's how I got involved in calligraphy in the first place with David Meckelberg as my teacher. And this piece is rubber stamps. One of the things in the Immaculate Heart Art Department tradition was to carve typographic fonts by hand into rubber erasers and then stamp those carved, font letters to create words and, all sorts of different things with art. And so he hand stamped this with his rubber stamps. The main body is Helvetica caps, and then the serif face is Bembo. So this was, I asked him, these rules were something that were passed around a lot at Immaculate Heart, and I asked him about them, and I said it would really be nice if we could do something to show these rules. So he did this. And so this was done for Friends of Calligraphy's publication. It has since become a thing. There's something called the Carita Art Center in Los Angeles, which kind of carries on the tradition. Immaculate Heart, of course, closed many years ago in the 80s. And you see this on T-shirts and posters and even coffee mugs. Okay, following that, Susie Taylor did this cover. She did the artwork for this cover. And here, talking about use of color in a black, a non-color publication. I don't want to use the word black and white, but just, it was just no color on the interior. So she did this. And what I thought was interesting in going through my files, I found a letter from Sheila Waters where because she did a cover later, and in her letter, she said, "Tell Susie how much I admire her cover and work. Her technical command and aesthetic sensitivity are indeed of the highest rank. She's an undiscovered master as far as the rest of the world is concerned." And that just struck me, seeing it in year 2025. Susie passed away at the end of 2016. And of course, at the time, I did tell her, I did obey Sheila Waters' instructions, and I told her, and of course, she was a very modest person. This cover by John Stevens, and he did the cover, and these reproductions are a little bit brighter than they should be. I think it's partly the monitor. They could probably be adjusted. I don't know what you folks are all seeing on your screens, but it's not quite as bright pink, but it is pink red. Okay, so the next one is the Sheila Waters cover, and Sheila Waters actually did sketches, which she sent to me for me to pick. And she did 4 of them. And this is the one that we both, it wasn't just me, we, negotiated the discussion of how it would work and all of that. But I have all 4 of them still. They're very rough, but surprisingly, it's quite similar to what she did as a final piece. So you can see on the Z in the very last line what looks like what in printer's parlance used to be called a hickey is actually her initials, SW. This cover by Jovica Veljovic. So he did this. He sent me a bunch of things, which I think almost all of them were printed on the inside, but this one was for the cover. And I think it's really one of the most successful. This one is by Kevin Elston, who is not very well known in the calligraphy world, but he lived in Oakland, and I believe he lives in Sonoma now with his wife. He is an artist, she is a craftsperson in textiles. And this is an example of his watercolor work that I thought I would just throw in here because most people don't really know who he is. But in addition to this kind of thing, he worked for many years in the advertising and design field and did quite a bit of lettering. This one is by Rick Cusick, and this is really one of my favorites of everything that I did in this publication is this cover, also the coverage of him and his work. He's a towering figure, in my view, certainly in American calligraphy, but internationally as well. This one is by William Stewart, and he did this for Alphabet. And recently seen it reproduced, I think, on Facebook, might be, or possibly Instagram. I wanted to mention Zopfest. I think probably everyone here was aware of Zopfest when it happened. I was the editor of the catalog for the Zopfest exhibition, and that's a whole other story, but I thought I did want to mention it because it did involve editing, first of all, and it was for the Friends of Calligraphy. Other than that, it was really unusual, not like anything else. But this cover, one of the things that I felt like, in my opinion, added value was I did draw Rick Cusick into the whole Zopfest celebration. I asked him to design an interior spread with a display of Hermann Zopp's typefaces that were done for Hallmark. Zopp had a lengthy consulting relationship with Hallmark, and he did a movie, which I'm sure everyone here has seen, on the way he did calligraphy. But he also designed a whole cluster of typefaces that vary from highly calligraphic to very traditional typography type fonts, so Rick took up the challenge and did the internal spread and also some narrative about the consulting arrangement, and which he later turned into his own book, on that topic. It's a marvelous book, really, really good. But he did this as a this is the catalog. It's 180 pages approximately, hardbound. He did it as a wraparound, and I'm sorry, there's Mylar on this cover, so you can't really see it. But this is the front, and where you see the cutoff on the edge, that is the wraparound. So those are the ones I wanted to show you. And then I want to thank the people who helped me with this. Marcia, Andrea Grimes helped, because I had to go to the library, of course, and look at some of this because I don't have some of it. Meredith, Barbara, and Carl, thank you so much for your work. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. So that was that's what I remember a lot, is those covers and working with those folks and how generous they were and how appreciative I am for their contribution. Really helped me, and I think was a success.
So before we move on to Carl's presentation, does anybody want to ask John a question about what you just saw? Anything? Nope. Okay, Carl.
Okay. Let's see if I can do this. It's this. Share. Okay. Are you seeing a black screen and the slides, or is it working?
Works.
Okay. So John and I talked the other day. He was showing me his presentation, and I go, wow, I got some great covers made specifically for Alphabet myself. And so I was just copying the idea. I thought I would show you the ones that were made specifically for Alphabet as well, but came from John. And this was my very first issue in 1989. And I had a big story on Georgia, and I asked her if she would do the cover. And the interesting thing about this was that she gave me the big A and the big Z on a separate mechanical, and then the B through the Y also on a separate one. So I was free to make a 2-color. In fact, you can see it was a 3-color cover. And Georgia was surprised that I did it in more than one color. So she was a little, not pleasantly surprised, let's put it that way, that she thought it would all be in one color. And I was surprised that she gave me the artwork like it was a 2-color job. At any rate, and before we were talking about continuity from issue to issue, and I had decided right from the beginning that it was going to be different every issue. And so this was, because this is my first, and I was, this was the first time in 4 or 5 years that it had been called Alphabet. I wanted to have Roman caps like John's masthead for this. And then it went on, and I changed the logo or the masthead of the magazine every issue to reflect what was going on in each issue. And I always changed the typeface every issue, both the headline and the text face, to if there was a connection to somebody being profiled or any kind of story in the magazine. I also wanted the typography to reflect that. So I changed it every single issue. So that was my very first issue. And then my last issue of the 9 that I did in those 3 years was John Stevens. We had a big profile of John, and I just asked him for some alphabets, and he gave me 4 or 5, and this was the one I chose that was vertical, so we wrapped it around sideways to try and make it a little abstract. And John also really liked to do vertical lettering at the time, so I did the masthead in vertical lettering, and I realized that the orientation with this would make it abstract here. So I really liked that idea. But I remember when I showed this issue to Georgiana, just fresh off the printer, she's like, "What does that say?" So, and that's sort of what I wanted. I wanted it to be Marx. But once we got going on in 2015 and took over for my 3rd issue, I had this idea for a what do they call it? Die cut cover, and it turned out that it was too ambitious. So each one of these was laser cut, and John was teaching at Letterform Archive right when I was going into production for this, or I had the idea as an
Let
issue or
me
two.
stop you for a second because your
Sure.
slides are not advancing as far as.
Oh, crap. Okay, let me do this then. Okay, do you see the cut paper cover?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
now
we
Okay.
missed John. Yeah, there we
All
go.
right. Okay, so this is George's. Did you see George's?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. This was John's. This is the one that was my last issue the first time that I was editor. So this was 1992. And this horizontal it's vertical lettering turned on its side for the cover. And then when I took over in 2015, I had this idea for a die cut cover right from the beginning. And this is one that I really wanted to do myself, but I knew I couldn't put my own artwork on the cover. So I went to John, who likes Neuland stuff, because there's a big Neuland story in this issue. And I told him my concept, and he said, yeah, I do want to do that, but he had to have open heart surgery. Right. So he says, as soon as the operation is over, I'll make these things. And in the big issue that we did that was devoted to him a few years ago, the last thing he said was that these alphabets were done fresh off the ventilator. So this, it was a big learning curve when we did this one. The printers they were all for it. But at the end of it, they said, we love doing that, but if you ever want to do this again, it's going to cost you a whole lot more. But we stayed within the budget, and really exciting. We got so much great feedback for this. And then this one, I was doing the story on Andrew van der Merwe from South Africa, the wonderful beach calligrapher. And I said, cover's all yours, do whatever you want with it. And he took the measurements for the cover and designed this on the beach. The photograph came ready to pop in like this. And so the right foot is on the front cover, the left foot is on the back cover. And just tremendous. And he was not thrilled with the alphabet itself on the cover, but the photograph was so beautiful. I said, Andrew, I know what you're talking about. I can see that these aren't your best letters, or that you think they're not your best letters, but it's just, I was thrilled beyond belief with this. Really exciting. And then we did a big story on Yukimi. I said, cover's all yours, do whatever you want. And of course, she's in love with Killian style work. So she made this alphabet for us, specifically for us. All these people hadn't been paid, by the way. I ended up offering money later, but all of them were like, cover of alphabet, do an alphabet, I'm all for it. So it was lovely. And this is one of my favorite issues. Madeline Dinkle is somebody whose work I've always loved and really wanted to do a big story on her. And it was a real challenge to find information out about her and to find more artwork until I finally hit the mother lode in both of those ways. She actually recorded 8 hours of talking about her career that was in the British Library. And her niece, who is also a graphic designer, had all her work, and I was able to get in touch with both of those people. So I had what's really my favorite story, because it's so much in her words, and she was such a big character. But she didn't do any alphabets. So Julian Waters and I share a big affinity for Madeline Dinkle, and I asked him if he would do an alphabet in Madeline Dinkle's style. So you can see here that he was using the letters from this piece on the right, and the fact that she loved to do multiple stroke letters for a lot of her work, and he put those things together to make this. And this paste paper background is from Madeline Durham. Am I saying that right? Durham, I think, in New Mexico, who does the lovely striped paste papers. And I was trying to make this look like the waves in the Maker's piece on the left. So this is a really thrilling cover for Julian and I to work on together with this, to have Madeline Dinkle on the cover of her magazine. And this was the front and back. And the front and back interaction is important to me, and it's not always easy to manage. But this was the issue that Sandy Collins, the wonderful proofreader that worked for us for 5 years, wanted to do a story on Rosie Kelly before she died. And so this was one of those things where she suggested it, and they did interviews on the phone and wrote it out. She got to read the story, but she died before it was laid out because she was in hospice through this whole thing. So this is a really exciting story that popped up, and we pushed Sherry Trial to the next issue. But I love the interaction of these two artists and the way the covers worked on this. So the very next issue was Sherry A. Trial, the wonderful miniature artist who lives in Pennsylvania and does lots of lettering-based miniature painting. And I said, you can have the cover, any alphabet idea. I'd always thrown out the idea of an alphabet sentence. She was the first one who took me up on it. And this is actual size when you look at this cover on a piece of vellum. She sent me the original of that. I've got it. It's hanging, I'm pointing at it right now. If you can see the little thing, it's hanging on my wall right there. And we did a big story on James Hayes in that issue and had this great certificate that Ray Dubal did for James Hayes when he joined the Typographic Society in Chicago that fit on the back so well. But just tremendous loving work that was given to Alphabet specifically for us. Another one was Andrea Wunderlich from Germany. I said, want to do an alphabet? Anything you want. And she sent me this beautiful full color one with all this white space. And there was also a story that Sandy Collins did on Judy Melvin in this issue. And so the back cover was not created for Alphabet, but I love the interaction between these two. As far as front and back goes, this is my favorite of all the issues because the full bleed back and then the framed front, I thought worked so well. And then finally, the only one that didn't work was Peter Thornton. I said, please give me an alphabet. I offered him some money for that. And he did this piece that just didn't feel like the cover to me. So definitely paid him and used it as the opening shot in the article. And luckily we had this, alphabetically themed piece. And this is in the Harrison. If you'd like to see this in person, it's not that big. We probably printed it bigger than it was done. So that was the only cover that we asked for that didn't make the cover. And then the last one here is John Stevens. When we did the full issue on John in 2022, this is the alphabet that he created for the cover. And John, it was so interesting that you were talking about what's an object and what is calligraphy when it's reproduced. And that is a huge issue with John Stevens, that he talks about, when we see, he would consider this the object or a photograph of the calligraphic object. And then as soon as it gets turned into the graphics that we're seeing on the left, it becomes something else. And he talked about that in the article, and we talked about it a lot for his work and the cover itself. So this was going to be the cover. It was going to be the white and the green. And at the last minute, I thought, it would be cool. What if it was red like the first alphabet cover? And John is another person like Georgia who really, wants to be sure that the artwork is being used in a way that jibes with his sensibility. So I wasn't sure at all if he would go for this. And as soon as I sent him this, I laid it out in the red and the white, like you see on the left, and sent it to him. I said, what if we echoed, the first alphabet cover when you were on it? And he wrote right back. He goes, I love it. Let's do it. So I wasn't trying to capture John's, that red. I just thought it was good enough that it was red, black, and white. So that was the last time that we had not a commission cover, but one that was made specifically for Alphabet. Okay.
Thank you. Those were both great to see. And Judy, I don't know if Judy, Jane, Melissa, and John, Christopher have anything they want to hold up if they don't have it on slides. Do you have any issues that you want to show?
I
It's
could show
all time.
something. I could show something.
Great. Let's Judy go first and then Jane.
Okay. How am I doing? This is Jovitsa's work, and I had been corresponding with him, and he was working with this typeface, Silentium Pro, which I used for titling in my issues, and he had made an arrangement like this with his typeface, and I asked for his permission if I could reproduce it, and he laughed and said, "Oh, sure, go ahead." And it was such a pain. He had all of these extra little tiny increments of spacing inserted here and there. And it really took me a long time. And I gave him such a hard time for that. And he said, "Well, congratulations. You did it." But I thought that was funny. I thought it'd be an easy cover to do. It was not.
Shall I go ahead?
Please, Jane.
This is a cover by Arne Wolf. And this is the front. And then it opened.
Pull it up a little higher, Jane.
And there's an article in the issue about Arne.
Oh, that's very Arne.
And the back cover, also by Arne. Whoops.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Can I show one more?
Sure.
Sure.
I'm just very fond of this. This is, you all know.
Lord.
Up a little higher.
It's on a heavy tan paper, and then the back. You've all seen it before, but it's just a wonderful cover.
Christopher, do you have anything you want to show? Melissa, you standing by?
Christopher, you're muted. Oh,
I know. I just took it off. I have to say, one of my favorite explorations was my very last one, where I did the 4 little booklets. And I really love the fact that the logo, which was by John Burns, worked not only on each book, but then it worked on the back as well. And then sometimes it was in half, and sometimes it was whole when you open the books up. And it was really fun to work with something where suddenly I had this tiny little format, because you can see this is quite small. And then to do, so actually, Marcia, I think this is yours. A journal about a trip. And we had Gina Jonas in this issue doing calligraphy as a spiritual way, which is very Gina Jonas. It's a little bit mysterious, a little bit highfalutin, but delightful to read. And then I did a thing looking at one particular manuscript to sort of so I wrote this one with a historical manuscript that I think someone at the FOC had given to me. It was an old one of those giant pages of Southern Gothic, and so this is an examination of the script. And then the last thing is so each one is really quite different. The last thing is letters in metal, so all different. And some of things were, just popular stuff you can see in the street. Some were there, Alan Blackman sent me this stencil that he had bought that I actually still have, which is lovely. So I don't think I show the whole thing. No, I don't. I just show details, and then that's on the. So a lot of the photographs are actually taken in California, and then other things were metal letters that I had lying around. So just being able to play with the format, I thought that was really delightful. Ran over budget, which I paid most of it, the over budget.
I believe mine is still sitting on my desk.
Yeah, wonderful.
So Melissa?
Yeah, so I also played with format, or Brooke and I played with format. This one is one of my favorites. I'm gonna get my background unblurred. This one is believe it or not, Pat Buttes. It was a real departure for her. She was my mentor and teacher, and the cover is not only on the back, but there was an extender so that it goes all the way out. The front folds in for the cover, and so that was an exciting departure. I love this one by Tom Costello, which is a morphing from 1999 to 2000.
Cool.
And then this one, well, the first one we did with Brooke was just a complete departure. It was like, okay, let's just put a face on it. Which was fun. But this one, this is one of my favorite issues. In fact, I have more copies of this than any of the other ones because it was one of my favorites. That cover is by Scott Kim, and he did a whole article on writing frontwards and backwards, which was cool. Inversions, called. And the other thing that this article was an article written by my mother on who it was a neuropsychologist about writing with your left hand and the different positions that you can write with your left hand and how it affects your mentality. So those are the kinds of things that I found really interesting. That's it.
Maybe like get left out here. I think we have everybody's contribution. So we've talked a lot about what our favorite issues are and our favorite approaches, and well, now it's time for the horror stories. So anybody want to tell any thing of the either misses or near misses, or perhaps lessons learned from those misses or near misses?
I had some terrible problems with printing. Yeah. And one issue had to be reprinted. It was so badly printed that it was not acceptable. And there, was not exactly a dispute, but that was uncomfortable. That was very uncomfortable. But it was so obvious that they couldn't really argue. So, always a challenge. I don't think that's the same today, Carl, with what you're doing with your community printers who sound marvelous and they do beautiful work, obviously, but it's a completely different industry, really, today. But, one of the things I recently ran into, of all people, Susan Skarsgård, who was out here. I don't know why, but we happened to cross paths at the San Francisco Public Library. And she reminded me that she did a publication called Quill. And she reminded me that just when she accepted that position, if you will, that she phoned me. I completely had forgotten this. And she phoned me to see if I had any advice for her. And I immediately said, "Oh, I probably told you don't do it." She said, "No, you didn't say that." But she said that I said, "Pay attention to your budget. Make sure you have a budget to start with." and understand what that budget will buy you. And that was absolutely true in my tenure. That something like an unacceptable press run of the journal, yeah, that was on the printer. That was on the printer. We would not take that. We would not pay for it. So they had to reprint it. So that was a nightmare. I think I told you about some of the articles that I rejected. I did drive Sandy Diamond to tears, unfortunately, over something she wrote that I asked to be edited. And she found that a very frustrating experience, and it was difficult. It was difficult. But she did thank me in the end. So those kinds of interactions, unfortunate, but I think that's well within the scope of what an editor should be doing, in my opinion.
Anyone else want to contribute to the nightmares of being an editor?
One of the issues I did on the year that we were the 40th anniversary, I think it was the second or third issue, I got the idea to do a retrospective of logos, Calligraphia logos and the conference logos and all kinds of things. And I had it laid out. And of course, I waited close to the last minute because I was busy with the other articles. And I finally got it into shape about 2 nights before it was to go to press. And I realized I needed to give credit to everybody, who did the logo at which time. And I got most of them, but there were a bunch I didn't know. So I asked Georgiana, who said, I don't remember that kind of stuff. Ask Susie. And I spent a Sunday night from about 7 o'clock till almost midnight, the night before going to press, sending these things back and forth to Susie. And she would look at it and she'd go, oh, that's a terrible reproduction. Wait a minute, I have a better one. And she'd scan it in. And 5 minutes later, I'd get the file and it would be ready. And then I'd send her another proof. And she'd, wait a minute, that's not good. I have a better one of this logo. And we went on for hours back and forth. I mean, she was invaluable, giving me another logo or a better version, and she knew exactly who did it. And it helped immensely, but I was tearing my hair out because I'd promised the printer I'd send the files at 9 o'clock in the morning on Monday, and it is now midnight on Sunday night, and it had to be perfect because it was for Susie. But we got it done.
Could I talk about Susie?
Sure.
Susie was, she was everything to me about FOC. And, she sort of talked me into taking over the job this time. And, but I remember when I first took it over, she pointed out that John always had an alphabet on the cover of every issue. And so I never thought, I've always thought we needed to have an alphabet, and other editors have, ignored that, which is fine. But I wanted to be faithful to that idea with Susie. And really the biggest nightmare was the year that Susie was leaving us. And so, that was the only problems I've ever had with the issue itself, with the magazine itself, is when the printers wouldn't meet our mailing deadlines. And I thought we would have to postpone the mailing. But Marcia, I want to say, there was one time when I thought I was going to be late, and I called up Marcia. I said, so what happens when you're late? And she said, I was never late. And that was just like, oh crap, I can't be late, because Marcia was never late. So I've made all the deadlines. There have been some very close calls, but I've made all the deadlines. And the printers, I'll call up and say, are they ready? And they go, well, they're not going to be ready till next week. I'm going, are you kidding me? I told you what the deadline was. And every time they have said, well, we're not sure we're going to make it, but we'll try. And then they've made it. So it's close nightmares, but nothing like publishing around losing Susie. And then the memorial issues were sad but joyful. Judy and John both wrote fantastic stories about her, and I love doing those issues. And also, if you go back and look at the issue immediately following Susie's death, there is the original artwork for the cover that John had her do is on the second page, sort of the editorial page. So you can see that there, or in the Harrison collection. A good reason to go to the Harrison is to see Susie Taylor's collection of stuff. So
I'd like to say one thing about Susie. I was invited to her home once, long and long ago. And I looked at her drawing table in the middle of her, I guess, kitchen or living room or wherever. And I thought, oh my God, you produce your unbelievable work sitting at this little table. I mean, talk about monk minimalism. It was just very impressive to me.
well, there's a picture of that table in the also in that same issue about Susie.
Yeah, she was a great friend, and I'm not really over her, her passing. Um, but I will say that I probably would not have been the editor if she had not encouraged me, pretty much at every step of the way. So yeah, that,
I
it's hard to really even speak of it. It was so much.
I second that completely. I would not be editor if it wasn't for Susie this time. She was the one who suggested it. I wasn't even thinking of it. And and to this day, I mean, all these 9 years later, I still think every time I finish an issue that I'm really happy about, I mourn the fact that Susie is the person I wished would be seeing it more than anybody. So here's to Susie.
Judy, you look like you have something to say to that. Do you want to add anything?
Susie was a dear friend, and I think I did say that she talked me into being editor, but she talked me into a lot of things. She was a lot of fun to hang out with. I miss her a lot.
Anybody else want to add to memorializing Susie from this moment?
No. She was a gem. Yeah, Melissa.
I have more nightmares.
Oh,
Well, Jane is responsible for me being editor because she talked me into it. And Jane, I don't remember whether you were the one that suggested that I work with Brooke Holvey together. I think you were.
I confess. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That was my nightmare. Not because of Brooke, but because I'm very left-brained and Brooke Holvey is very right-brained. And putting the two of us together was an extreme challenge in communication. Like you said, John, in relationships and talking with people. For me, I'm also a control freak. So retrospectively, when I look back, I learned more about myself in doing the alphabet than anything else. I was difficult to work with. And but I think the result was pretty good because we were so different and put the two together. I think we came out with some pretty good issues. But I did learn a lot about collaborating or my not being able to collaborate and my need to be in control of everything as an editor. And Marcia, I'm sure you concur with us working together on the conferences that I'm a little bit of a challenge.
no comment.
I'm learning. I'm trying to be better. I'm aware.
Right. Water under the bridge. We survived.
Yeah, we did a good job too. Yeah, so that was the challenge for me.
So one of the questions we came up with was, who was your favorite person to interview? So I think some of you have touched on your favorite stories. I'm not sure that's the same answer, but if you have anything else you want to add to that,
Yeah, I could speak to that. My absolute favorite was Arne Wolf, who I interviewed. However, he said we tried it out. He and Anna were friends, lived close by. I was very surprised to become friends with them, but I did. They were lovely. We tried to do an actual interview, kind of face to face, right, with notes and things like that. And he said, no, this isn't working. Send me the questions and I will write the answers. And I thought, okay, all right. And that indeed was, the way to go. And he wrote a marvelous text, which of course I published. The other one was with Kazuaki Tanahashi, and a huge influence on me. Even though I don't do Japanese calligraphy, but I love everything Japanese. And there were connections. In my youth, I was very involved in Aikido for many years. And he, in fact, had worked with the founder of Aikido, Morihei Ueshiba, and had written a book, translated a book by him. So that connection, if you're ever a martial arts student, it just is beyond, something to meet somebody like that. And of course, he's still with us and going strong from what I can tell. So I would say those two, Arne Wolf and Kazuaki Tanahashi, were people that I felt very fortunate to kind of have them talk about what they did and then actually publish it.
I go next.
Please, Christopher, go ahead.
Actually, when I was looking at your questions and thinking, well, who did I enjoy interviewing? I saw a lot of my best interviews were done by other people. I assigned someone to interview. And so that I didn't do that many interviews myself, but Scott Cleland was in my very first issue. And I don't know if you remember him. He died a little while ago, maybe 10 years ago. I don't know. It's quite a while ago now. But he did something called the Alphabet Adventure, and he acted out. So I just held up because he was an actor, and he made all of these props, and he was a scribe through time, starting with cavemen and going up through the Romans and the Middle Ages. And he was just so much fun, and he also made all these things. So he made scrolls, he made cuneiform tablets. He just did all of it, and it was such a pleasure to get pictures from him and just to chat with him because he had so much life to him, and he just loved the history of lettering and the sort of personalities that came through all of these periods of writing. So I loved when I opened up, I'd forgotten that I did that article. And of opening that up and seeing his face and seeing what he offered to this community, not as like one of the top calligraphers in the world, but as someone who just was immersed in this world and trying to bring it to other people.
I took one of Scott's classes at one of the conferences and fell in love with him. He was amazing. And he did a presentation at that conference of his history of writing that he did as an artist in residence for kids in schools. And it was amazing. He was just delightful, just one of the most wonderful people to be involved with. In fact, I plagued him with the request to make a video of that presentation, and he finally did before he died. He did make a video of that presentation, and it's just amazing.
I'm sure. Was that in Minnesota, the conference? I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's where he was from. That's where he and his partner lived. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great.
Any Marcia, go ahead.
Like Christopher, I didn't interview people. I found writers. Either I asked people or people suggested, because writing was much more difficult for me than designing. But one issue I did, and I don't remember where the idea came from or who gave it to me or how it came about, but I did an issue called The Business of Calligraphy. And I asked 12, okay, well, I knew it was not my idea.
I'll just throw my 2 cents in. I also taught a workshop called The Business of Calligraphy for the Friends of Calligraphy. So
Yeah.
I think that it might have been around the same time.
So we asked 12 calligraphers. Jane Brenner was one of them, Melissa, Georgia Deaver, John Burns, Jane Dill. This is just the title page with the 12 little blocks. And then in the back, I took the little block, and that's the bio of each of the artists. And we came up with a series of questions, and the entire issue is the questions and answers. And even though people wrote them and sent them in, I think it reads like a conversation among these 12 people about being a professional calligrapher. And it was one of the most fun ones to do, to work with people and they were in California and Hawaii and New York, and I forget where everybody was from, but that was one of my most fun ones.
So, or is there another story or nightmare, Jane?
I'd like to follow up what Marcia said. My last issue, I put out a call from members to write in what they were thinking about calligraphy, what it meant to them, what they felt the future of it would be. I don't think I used the word future, but it came up. And we had about 20 responses. Some of the people I had never heard of before. They never showed up again, but they took the time to write in that one, on that one theme. And we published all of the entries that came in. It was profound for me. And I think that the membership really responded to being asked that question. It was very, very satisfying.
Do you remember any specific comments that you were surprised by or heartened by?
Well, I wasn't surprised by them, but I thought that people had really thought a great deal about what they wanted to write. And of course, the C word, computer, was mentioned a number of times. But it was provocative too. I mean, I didn't agree with everything that was said, of course, but I think that the membership of FOC probably enjoyed reading what their friends were thinking about and how far they had come or what they were having trouble with. It was a wonderful response.
So tagging on to this idea of calligraphy as a business and working on the newsletter, I wanted to ask the question of whether or not the budget has been constraining or whether the budget has pushed you to be more creative, or if you have any other comments about working within a budget. And you mentioned, Carl, that you were paying for covers, which I didn't know that that was a thing, but I just wanted to throw out that concept of, here's this project that is a fine art display and an editorial, but it's also deals with the aspect of budgeting.
Well, I would like to say that if I offer them money, it is out of my pocket, like Christopher with that issue, his design concept being more important to him than, I feel so lucky that I have, it's not a lot of money that we get paid, but it is enough for me to lose myself in it. And I'm so in love with being able to get to do this that I'm happy to pay for a cover, just so that it's not a complete, they're giving us so much of their time, the subjects of the articles and stuff, that I just want them to feel appreciated. And so it's for my own amusement to be able to offer that, I guess, or hopefully for everybody's amusement to offer the money. So the budget is not constraining. It's just I've got this budget. I've got this amount of money that we pay the printer. It's going up a little bit, and the the council goes along with it, but I've never really gone to the council and say, let's spend a whole lot of extra money. It's just I'll call Dean and say, do we have enough to go to 40 pages instead of 36? And the answer is usually yes. So it's nice. It's it's a dream all the way through. With my relationship with the council, my relationship with the contributors, my relationship with um, the proofreaders. You know, I say proofreaders and council because they're holding my hand through so much of it, and and the printers themselves. It's so much fun. I love it. Thank you. Thank you for letting me have this job.
So I will mention that the decision to pay the editor began during my tenure,
Mhm.
and it was quite controversial, much more so than I ever anticipated, because I always thought it was a ridiculously small amount of money to be concerned with. But on the other hand, this is an organization supported by membership dues. And so, it's quite real, even if the amounts are small, it's still real. And so, had I known that there would be so much controversy, I would not have asked for it because I do not like controversy. I'm not a litigator, by the way. That's why I do transactional legal work. But I did occasionally pay people out of pocket, small amounts of money, $100, $150, $200. I mean, really negligible. I mean, artists are so poorly paid, unfortunately, which is why I got out of the business, but to some extent. But mostly my attitude was, particularly like with those people who did covers. Okay, no, those are only a few of the issues. I did use pre-existing artwork on a so I did I did pay, costs had to be paid. Um, it was difficult, and certainly printing was the biggest part of it. But very true. And I'm glad Susan Skarsgård reminded me that I told her to watch your budget. That's very important because otherwise you can't do this. So
Well, John, I want to say thank you for breaking that open for us because I absolutely could not do this without what I'm getting paid. And it's lovely to be able to think that there's this amount of money waiting for me at the end, and then I just don't think about it anymore and throw myself into it. And I couldn't do it without it. So thank you so much.
well, in my day, it was only 5,000 a year. So which, that was nice. That was nice, but certainly not anywhere near what you would commercially charge for something like this. But that was fine. Um, and I had help, from people in Friends of Calligraphy, like Virginia LaRue, for example, certainly Susie Taylor, were who lobbied on behalf of that effort. But yeah, we do have to make a living, so it's it is real.
Yeah.
What is your time worth to do something like this? And I think all of us did it for love, even if we were paid, a nominal, honorarium, if you will. You have to love this. If you don't love it, don't do it.
Yeah, I want to say that thinking back, because going back to 2004, 2005, that's 20 years ago. And so much has changed now. So, Carl, I look at your issues and I'm really jealous because they're fat and they're in color.
Yeah.
And back when I was doing it, it was black and white and that was it. And in 32 pages. And I sweated it every single time with the printing. Uh, And so I think it did constrain what I was able to do. But I've always believed you work within a budget. So
Yeah.
yeah. And I I actually I don't think about how I got paid for it. I mean, I did get paid for it, and that was really important. I wouldn't have done it if I didn't get paid. But my real also, you had to mail things. You had to mail CDs, and so I had lots of costs in terms of postage and sending things back and forth. That now I just like with Letter Arts Review, I have no costs. Everything is sent to me digitally. We transfer and so on. Um, and it's a completely different picture from what doing Alphabet was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I will add that I am very jealous in a way. I'm not actually jealous, but that the Carl, what you do with digital typography and layout is very, very impressive to me and very exciting. And when I was doing it, everything was by hand. I ordered type. I ordered it,
Yes.
and the typesetter, it would come these proofs from the typesetter. And if I wanted any changes, I had to deal with the typesetter. And now all of that design and layout and even pre-press, I mean, I don't know the extent of how you do it, but I can imagine. And that's a change in the industry itself. Designers are expected now to handle all of those things. And we used to have something called strippers of all things. And those were people who handled film to make plates for printing, and they cut up the negatives and put it all together, and you had to watch out for, you'd have to get proofs and check for mistakes that they would make. And now it's totally different. It's like a revolution.
Exactly, John. When I started in '89, we were pasting it up. And my wife, Sharon, I have to, another shout out, it couldn't have happened without her, that she really taught me about graphic design. And in the middle, I did 9 issues. The fifth issue, which was the history, the oral history, that was the one where she said, "We're doing this on a Mac." No, no. But she was the one who dragged me into it. So it happened, where we changed that we were doing the typography happened right in the middle of my run that time. And it gives you so much more control. But at first we were sending the type out, and Linnea told me they were laughing in the halls of Adobe at the typography in my first issue. And it wasn't on me. I was using a typesetter downtown, that had done such a terrible job with the text. I didn't recognize it, but I didn't do it. So, it was half on me, but mostly on them.
Well, I have a question. So, one of my issues with all this technology, which goes back to what I said at the very beginning, that I'm really oriented towards things made by hand with all of this. So, if you have to buy type, if you have to buy your subscription to Adobe, all of that software, if Lord knows you need a new computer, what does that all come out of your stipend,
Oh,
your
yeah, of
honorarium?
course. No, maintaining my equipment and that subscription, I never even thought of charging, talking to the council about that. It's just I'm still a graphic designer, and it's one of my expenses. So this is one of the things that affords me as a freelance editor, I guess you'd say, to be able to do this. Yeah, none of it is. I really hesitate to ask FOC for any more money. I want to do it. I want it to be affordable for us so that I can keep doing it. So, yeah, no problem with that. And
Thank you.
these days, it really is only the Adobe subscription anymore. Uh, if I want a typeface for an article, typeface because I'm doing an article on somebody who was a type designer and I need that typeface and it's not part of the Adobe type, I don't even think about worrying about the money. It'll be like, oh, good, I get a new Warren Chappell typeface or a new digital version of something. So I'm happy.
When when I started in 88, the first issue, the Mac was only 4 years old, but I had just started using it to lay out some of my freelance jobs. And I started with PageMaker version 1. I think it was the second or third issue. I wanted to do a wrap around an image. I had the idea, but PageMaker didn't have the capabilities. So I had to put the image on a piece of paper, lay out a few lines, make manual returns, and then print it out, and then do another couple of lines, manual returns, and paste the picture in. And I did a whole page with a silhouette, just one line at a time, because that's what, the software didn't have those capabilities. And I went through PageMaker and Quark and InDesign, and it's an amazing difference how the software comes. So it's worth almost every penny to have it. But, having seen the change from, I used to do layouts the way John did, paste up and T-squares and triangles and hot glue and all, yeah, wraps and zipatone and all that, and up to what we can do now. That's
hot wax.
pretty amazing. Yeah, hot wax. I remember.
Yeah.
And spray mount. I don't know how many
Spray
brain cells I've lost to spray mount, but
And watching people don't know how to use rubber cement anymore.
oh,
And there's no thinner anymore. You can't buy the thinner. So it comes out of the can in the wrong consistency. You cannot use it.
oh,
Anyway, we're all dating ourselves very much.
yeah.
It was kind of exciting to be in that transition, from pasting it up to, because when we first were using the computer, we were still going to the service bureau and getting the galleys to paste up, and then the pages were laid out. But I was still pasting up the images to go in deep into that first term. So it changed in increments. By the time we started in 2015, it's all in the computer now. So it's liberating. Liberating is the word.
We only had a limited typefaces. When the Mac first came out, I had a choice of Times and Helvetica. Oh, and Zopdingbats.
Plenty of that.
Now we have every type under the sun and then some to choose from.
Oh, well, that's interesting that just recently for the Christoffel Bowden's issue, we wanted to use a Bertold Volpi typeface that is not available digitally. So I scanned a page from a book and pasted each letter by hand, in Photoshop and in InDesign. So that was sort of a hand layout just recently. But Christoffel wrote back, he said that headline was a gift. He considered it a gift.
Oh,
Pegasus, that was the typeface.
So we're coming towards the end of our 2 hours, and one thing I wanted to address, which sort of came up in this conversation, is archiving. And that with the new technology, we have PDFs to archive these issues and make them available. I had recently been asked by a client to please send her PDFs of some imitations I did, and I just laughed and said, that's hysterical. We didn't have PDFs in those days, and it was done in a, like PageMaker or Quark, and I can't even open these anymore, and the fonts aren't even, we can't use that format anymore. So it's all of that is really gone except for having hard copies. So I know that the library has copies of the editions, but in terms of all your work, Carl, being archived and being digitally available, and anybody else who worked in a format that allowed for that digital, at least as long as we have PDFs, we have that available to the membership.
Dean Rubino is working on a project where she's scanning in all the covers and title pages of the issues that before they were done on the computer. I sent her all of mine, and I know she's asked Carl, and I think all of the early issues, she's just scanning them in, and so that they will be online. Not the whole issue, but at least the covers and the title page, so we can see what was available.
That's really admirable.
at this point, we are still print only, really, that our issues are not available as PDFs online. I don't, that's not something that I'm worried about, but it is something the council has discussed, and at this point, they are not available as PDFs. So,
But since we only have a certain budget to print a certain number, having that ability later on to have a digital copy or a digital archive, when the centennial of the FOC comes around and, if we have these archived in some way that they're still manually able to be printed or reprinted, I just look at that as a future potential.
well, I wonder if Marcia and Judy, you have yours completely as available as PDFs?
Yep. I had to dig out some CDs and get them because I had taken them off the computer and stored them, but I put them back on, and I have everything as a full PDF.
So I'm actually a big believer that the digital dark ages are upon us, and I have very little hope that digital files are going to remain. Um, I have hard copies of Alphabet, and I can go and look at them, and they will never change unless the house burns down. And I can't read CDs anymore, and I don't have Quark Express anymore.
Mhm.
And thumb drives and old hard drives have died. And I actually do not. I have a very tech-oriented friend who's always like, "Oh, that's easy. Take all your CDs and put them all onto a hard drive." And I'm like, "Do you have 2 days to be doing that?" And the answer is no. So things I've kept physically still exist. Things I've kept digitally, dead. So it's a lovely idea, and I wish I had made PDFs of my issues as I went, but I didn't. And I think your printed copies are going to actually last. So in 100 years, they can turn them into holograms because that's what everything will be,
Yeah.
and that's it, right? I'm sorry if that's the most deeply cynical thing about.
Yeah, I think you're right. I have cartons of stuff I can't access anymore. I'm just waiting to throw it all out. But in the near term, having that for reprinting purposes, if as long, like I said, as long as we have PDFs, which I don't think it will be the ultimate end of how things are.
They'll come up with a new.
There'll be something else so that everything we've done in our lifetimes are useless. And
Well, with
Well,
regard to archiving, don't forget the existence of at least the San Francisco Public Library has all of that.
Mhm.
That is being preserved
Yeah.
that way.
Fan
Of
of the
course, I think we're all keeping our files. So
Okay.
And for digital,
That's all we can
supposedly
do.
the cloud is a good way to save things because then you can reproduce it in any format. So
All right. So
yeah.
why don't we go around and take one more minute to say anything that you want to say? So if we start with Melissa.
I don't have anything else. I've just really enjoyed listening to everyone's stories and comparing to my experience. And I love it. I love it. And I'm very grateful for all of you and what you have contributed to the alphabet. It's always been one of my favorite publications.
I just wanted to mention, I tried to get in touch with as many of the publication editors as I could find. I couldn't reach Paul or Brooke or Don Moy, but there were two people besides. We know Alan just passed recently, but there was also Terry Louie was an editor from 92 to 94. He came between Carl the first time and Jane. And I think he also changed the format, the size.
He moved it around a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And Stan Knight did it from 2001 to 2003. I'm looking at the stewardship, but I do remember Stan because he got the articles, he wrote things, he had the layout, but I was his ink monkey. I was his, because he didn't do the computer at that point. What was that? The Agony and the Ecstasy? Oh, good grief.
Hmm.
Yep. So Stan passed a couple of years ago, but they were two of, they contributed a great deal in their time. Stan covered the Zopfest. He came down on his own dime, made himself a little press hat, and came for the whole opening of the Zopfest to cover it.
I want to say something about working with the Friends of Calligraphy, because I've worked with a lot of different calligraphy organizations around the country. And I know every group has its rivalries and its difficulties and difficult personalities, but there is something about the culture of the FOC that I think has facilitated this particular group doing really wonderful work and being able to collaborate with each other in a way that's really refreshing. Um, and and there's something about so many of the things that FOC does make sure that different people get roles within the activity, and draws from as broad a group. Uh, so it was a real pleasure to have this gig with FOC. Um, I and I think that has to be said, because I think you should appreciate that that the FOC has a very particular um, positive culture that gets things done, and obviously cultivates people's abilities and talents and with appreciation. And I appreciate that.
Cool, Christopher. The last thing I want to say is that I'm grateful to get to do this.
And we're grateful that you get to do this.
Very much.
Yeah.
I would just add that for me, certainly looking back, it is about people. It's about connections with people. The calligraphy is something different to each one of us. Her calligraphy is not the same as his calligraphy, and so we all have this internal experience with letter making or art, if you will. But Friends of Calligraphy is very special because it really does live up to its name. It brings people together. And that has been my experience, and the great reward of all of this effort has been the connection with people. And I am very grateful for that, very, very grateful for that, and still feel a connection, even though I no longer practice calligraphy. I aspire to one day again, but right now, no. But I'm still fascinated with the art and craft, and Friends of Calligraphy is the perfect kind of intersection of makers and doers, and practitioners and artists. And I am very appreciative of that.
Well, that's a beautiful note to end on. And so I think we'll stop here. Thank you all for spending time with us today. I just want to echo John and say, I think many of us come for lettering, but we end up with community.
Nice.
That's very nice. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So
All right.
Thank you, Meredith, for helping out and handling the technology.
thank you, Meredith.
Yes, and Marcia.
And
Yeah.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
Barbara.
thank you.
Keep
Great.
I'm going to let Meredith, if she's in charge of this, she can
Stop the recording.
hit the button, but thanks everybody. I really had a great time doing this.
Thank you.